in my life. Just this last week, life has been really, really hard. And I was writing this on one of those really hard days. And I just so needed to remember the same truth that he was teaching me 10 years ago again today. And I hope that as you guys hear my story, that you are just reminded of all of the times that he has been faithful to you and pursued you. So, if you would have told me 10 years ago that I would be the mother to 10 kids, I would have never believed you. That was not part of my plan or what I was expecting. I don't think I would have ever told anybody this, but I really just wanted something nice and easy, which probably would have included 2 kids, a white picket fence, a dog. And yet, God was so kind to not give me what I had planned or what I had wanted. My husband and I got married when we were really young. I was only 20. And we got pregnant very unexpectedly within probably the first 8 months, I would say, of our marriage. And I actually was fairly upset at first because we were pretty poor and we were fighting a lot too. Life was decently hard. And, but I would say within 13 weeks, we ended up miscarrying. And so we decided we didn't want to wait forever to have kids anymore. God had kind of placed that desire in our hearts over that time of being pregnant. And so we decided to start trying to have kids. So within the first 5 years of being married, we had 3 kids. So at this point, our oldest was 4, 3, and 1. And people ask me all the time if we had always wanted to adopt. And the answer is Brian, my husband, had kind of always had this passion, but I would say things like I wanted to have my own kids first. But through seeing adoption in the life of other people, I felt like, oh, this is something I could do. And I really had heard the verses about caring for orphans and widows, and I think I believed the lie that this would be an easy way to fulfill God's promise, while expanding the diversity in our family photo. We thought we had it all figured out. We had our 3 kids and decided that we would adopt from Ethiopia, and we were in the process and had finished paperwork to adopt 1, possibly 2 if something crazy happened. It was a Wednesday, and I got an email. I'm completely gonna cry, so I apologize in advance, but about triplet boys that were born at only 25 weeks and needing a home. I still remember getting that email. We were part of adoption group, and it was really just asking for prayer. It said, I'm not asking if any of you are up to the challenge. I'm simply asking for prayer because they needed a home right away. But I instantly just felt a tug at my heart. And I remember when my husband came home, I have no idea how that conversation went, but he's just as crazy as I am. So he was in, and within minutes, he was on the phone with the adoption agency. And within 48 hours, we were meeting with a beautiful teenage mom who had given life to these sweet boys, and with very little information and never seeing a picture, we became their parents. It became evident very quickly just how sick they were. The littlest, okay. The littlest of the triplets was only 13 ounces when he was born. We had found out that they were 7 months old when we adopted them. Over the past 7 months, they had endured countless surgeries. He had broken nearly every large bone in his body and had basically laid in a hospital bed for 7 months without ever really being held. He had needed machines to help him breathe. He was on a feeding tube to help him eat. And there were several occasions when they didn't even know if he would make it through the night. And I remember that first time we went in there to meet him, and we were so excited and at the same time completely terrified because of all of the machines, and we knew nothing about what was going on. And I picked him up to hold him, and because he was crying, and so it's like, oh, well, let's hold him and make him feel better. And as we were holding him, my husband and I, he just kept getting worse and crying more and more. And it was at that moment that I realized that he didn't even know how to respond to being held. That even a mother's touch was too overstimulating for him. In those first 30 days of bringing those boys home, we went to over 100 doctor's appointments. And there was a moment I remember when I was laying on the ground with the littlest one, Caleb, and I was kind of dangling a toy, trying to play with him. And at this point, he did not respond to sound at all and had failed all of his hearing tests. And he had been diagnosed with a visual impairment that could qualify him as legally blind. And he wasn't responding to anything I was doing, and I wondered if I would ever really be able to connect with my son. And it was around this time that I began to realize what our call to care for widows and orphans was really about. James 1:27 says this, "Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world." We were meant to love others in their pain and suffering. They did not need a family photo. They didn't need somebody who was trying to fulfill something in themselves. They needed someone who was going to lay down their life and serve them. I think that's part of what makes adoption so beautiful, is that it provides us the opportunity to love without expecting anything in return. And I think it took me until I was in the thick of it to realize that this adoption was not about me at all. That was a really long, hard year, but by God's grace, we just saw so much healing in our sweet boys. At 22 months, Caleb allowed food in his mouth for the first time. Even just a drop of water was a big deal. When he was just over 2 years old, so about 26 months, he took his very first steps. And by God's grace, just over time, we watched these boys who were once so sick just be healed over and over again in ways doctors never would have dreamed possible. It was about a year after we brought our boys home that we received an email about twins from Africa. And I know it seems like we respond to every email, but that is not true. We get a lot of emails. But I knew instantly that they were ours. And so called my husband, he said yes. We started to pursue the adoption, and they told us, no, we already have another family, they're not yours. And so we really just had to trust God that if they were theirs, he would bring them, if they were ours, he would bring them home to us. And so it wouldn't be long until the adoption agency called us and said, yes, the other family was unable to adopt them, and they need a home, and quickly. And so we said yes and started the process of bringing home our twins, who were 4 at the time. Just before 4, but 4 by the time they came home. But a couple months, this was probably in September time, after we had decided to bring them home, we were in the process. It was December, and I found out I was pregnant. Which I was not expecting, and I would say very surprised, but when right before we left for Uganda to bring our twins home, we went to a doctor's appointment. And we found out that our little guy that I was pregnant with had club feet. And at that time, it seemed so devastating. And what they do for club feet treatment is like once a week you have to go in and change casts and for 3 months, and that actually pretty well does what they need to anyways, that seemed very overwhelming at the time. How would I, with 9 kids, go to the doctors once a week and find childcare and get all of this? And I just was like, God, I just have no idea what you're doing here. Well, my husband ended up staying in Uganda for 6 weeks to bring our twins home. And when I was 19 weeks, I went to the doctor again, and we found out that it was far worse than they were anticipating. Sweet little boy had a really rare genetic condition that they said might not be compatible with life. And I just really struggled to see God's grace throughout my pregnancy. I had no idea what God was doing. Our twins came home, and here I am trying to bond with two new children who are 4 years old and try to reconcile what God was doing with our little one in my belly. We actually dedicated him when he was still in the womb because we weren't sure if he would make it. And only 8 weeks after bringing our twins home from Uganda, and I was 30 weeks pregnant, I had a partial placental abruption, and I found myself in the hospital, fighting for my life and the life of my child. And what before felt confusing at that time just felt hopeless. And I remember just thinking, God, best case scenario, I leave here with a child that will suffer his entire life. And worst case scenario, I leave here with no child at all, and I was stuck there indefinitely until they felt like it was as far along as they could get me in order to deliver. And I had a sweet friend come visit me in the hospital, and she brought me a children's Bible. And she said, Sherry, when I just really struggle to read the Bible and I don't know what God's doing, I read the kids' Bible, and it usually meets me where I'm at. So one night, I'm sitting in the hospital, feeling fairly hopeless, laying in bed, and I opened up the children's Bible, and this is what I read. Poor Isaiah. He read God's letter over and over to God's people, but no one listened to him at all, ever. They didn't want to hear God's promise. They didn't believe it. Did it maybe sound too good to be true? A story that ends happily ever after? Well, it does sound like a fairy tale, doesn't it? And as anyone would quickly tell you, fairy tales aren't true. Or are they? And it was then that I realized that my fairy tale ending was not in having a healthy baby, or even in having a baby at all. My hope was found in what was already accomplished on the cross. My happy ending did not depend on how I left that hospital, because I knew that no matter what happened, someday all sad things would become untrue. Ephesians 2:8-9 says, by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. And there, in that hospital room, all alone, God met me and said, here is your gift, and here is your happy ending. It was just a few days later that Declan would be born, and he is 6 years old today. And I can honestly say he is one of God's greatest gifts to me. He does not live a life of ease. He didn't speak until after he was 2 years old. He has endured many surgeries, and there will be more to come. We never believed or expected him to walk, and so we used to say that our hope was not that he would one day walk, but that one day he would run into the arms of Jesus. But by God's grace, at 5.5 years old, my boy took his first steps. Some doctors will tell us it's not if, but when. He'll have uncontrollable seizures, and we will likely never see healing on this side of heaven. But God is using our sweet boy to make his name great. And just like God usually does, he took a mama that believed that she could not care for one child with significant special needs, and he gave her the desire to care for two. When Declan was about a year old, I saw a photo of a little boy from China who looked just like Declan. And over that year of caring for Declan, there were so many occasions where, and even just our triplets, where I learned that I had to fight for them. And I looked at this sweet boy and thought, nobody is fighting for him. So when he was 3, this was 2 years later after paperwork and waiting, we brought Maddox home from China. And now my 2 boys, who are only 6 months apart, accompany each other to doctor's appointments, all over the US. We mostly go to Boston Children's, and one of my little boys, actually, Declan, got a Make-A-Wish this year, and we were in Boston when we found out, and I started asking him where would he go if he could go anywhere, and he said Boston. So we do try to make it as fun as possible. We get like McDonald's every day and ice cream, and they think that is pretty amazing. But they push each other around in wheelchairs. They scoot a lot on the floor, and they are so quick. I mean, they roll over each other, they fight, they're so cute. But only God could have planned something like that. As God continues to write the story of our lives, we know that our trials are not over, and that there will be more hospital stays and surgery, and more days than not, I find myself just begging for God's grace to make it through. But yet, I have great hope, because I know how the story ends.